In this video, we're going to talk about the stress axis, which is an example of a tripartite axis, meaning it has three parts, and the three parts are three different endocrine glands. The first one is the hypothalamus, which we're going to label as HT. The second one is the anterior pituitary gland, APG. And the third endocrine gland is the adrenal cortex right here. That's the outer part of the adrenal gland. And the adrenal glands are located just on top of each kidney. So we have the adrenal gland. So the final hormone secreted from the third part of this tripartite axis, cortisol, is controlled by two other hormones that are upstream in the pathway. And what starts this whole pathway to the secretion of cortisol? Well, that would be stress. So stress in many different types of forms activates this whole process. And stress is integrated in the hypothalamus here, and when the hypothalamus perceives different types of stress, such as it could be physical stress, emotional stress, then it starts secreting a hormone called CRH, or corticotropin releasing hormone. CRH travels through a specialized part of the circulatory system that I'll try and draw here, called the hypothalamic anterior pituitary portal system, and it's a network of capillaries that connect the hypothalamus to the anterior pituitary gland. So the CRH travels through here to the anterior pituitary, where it finds receptors on specialized cells in the anterior pituitary called corticotropes. And when CRH binds with those receptors, the anterior pituitary secretes a hormone called adrenocorticotropic hormone, or ACTH. So that comes from the anterior pituitary. ACTH is secreted into the blood, just the regular systemic bloodstream, where it travels all over the body, and where it happens to find receptors are in the adrenal cortex. And let me just make sure we specify that the part of the adrenal gland we're concerned with here is the cortex. That's an R right there. And when ACTH binds with receptors in the adrenal cortex, those cells secrete the final hormone in our pathway called cortisol. Cortisol is a steroid, so when ACTH binds with those cortisol-producing cells, the cortisol is actually synthesized and released, because cortisol, being a steroid or a fat-soluble hormone, can't be stored in those cells. Well, then cortisol goes into the systemic circulation, and it has receptors on many different cell types, including immune system cells. And so it actually works to suppress the immune system, which is why if you've ever had inflammation, you might have had an injection of prednisone, which is a synthetic form of cortisol. There are receptors in the liver, receptors in muscles, and also in adipose tissue. There are other places we'll find receptors for cortisol as well. And these collectively are called glucocorticoid receptors. I'll just make a note here that cortisol binds with the glucocorticoid receptor. And we see catabolic type reactions happening when cortisol binds with these tissues. So gluconeogenesis, or making new glucose, happens in the liver. We break down protein in the muscles, and we break down fats in the adipose tissue and liberate nutrients. The other thing we need to add on to this is negative feedback. So this tripartite axis is a nice example of negative feedback. So cortisol when it's released, it goes throughout the circulatory system, as I said, but it not only has receptors on these different target tissues, there are also receptors in the anterior pituitary and in the hypothalamus, and this line with the little hatches on it indicates negative feedback. And what happens is when cortisol binds with receptors in the anterior pituitary and in the hypothalamus, it actually suppresses the secretion of ACTH and CRH respectively. So that controls the release of cortisol. So no matter even if the stimulus for secretion of cortisol is really high, there's a limit to how much will be secreted because of this phenomenon of negative feedback. All right, so you should print out your notes template. You've got a blank, maybe a prettier version of this picture, and you should challenge yourself to label it and explain what's going on. And if you can do that without looking at your notes, then you have mastered the stress axis.